The hum of "The Gilded Spoon" was a carefully curated lie. Outside, the arteries of downtown Chicago pulsed with a frantic, metallic rhythm. The hiss of bus brakes, the distant wail of a siren, the percussive footsteps of a city perpetually late. Inside, however, was a time capsule. The air, thick with the ghosts of yesterday's fried onions and the promise of tomorrow's coffee, clung to the red Naugahyde booths. Fluorescent lights hummed a weary tune, casting a sterile glow on the chipped formica tabletops and the patron seeking refuge from the relentless present. In the rearmost booth, a throne of shadows, sat Julian Thorne. To the untrained eye, he was an anonymous figure in a bespoke navy suit, its quality betrayed only by the subtle drape of the fabric. His silver hair was cut with a precision that bordered on aggressive, and his face, etched with the fine lines of 67 years of calculated risk, was a study in impassive control. The vintage Audemars Piguet on his wrist was a silent testament to his station, its value sufficient to purchase the entire city block the diner occupied. Julian Thorne didn't just buy blocks, he reshaped skylines. Thorne Industries, a behemoth of global logistics and technology, was his Colosseum, built on his preternatural ability to forecast the future and his utter lack of sentimentality in dismantling the past. He despised these monthly excursions. He came to this diner, a relic from a bygone era, as a penance. His late wife, Eleanor, had cherished such places, calling them honest. To Julian, they were monuments to inefficiency, breeding grounds for germs and nostalgia. But he sat there, pushing a piece of leathery omelette around his plate, the familiar ache of her absence, a phantom limb he could never stop trying to touch. He was profoundly, existentially bored. Bored with the deferential whispers of his board members, with the sanitized, climate-controlled perfection of his life, with the predictable arc of acquisition and profit. His gaze, sharp and appraising, swept the room. A young couple bickering over a phone, a construction worker inhaling a cheeseburger, two elderly women dissecting a neighbor's indiscretions, data points, predictable, uninteresting. Then his eyes settled on the waitress. Her name was Clara Evans, and at 24, her world was a cramped, hand-to-mouth sketch compared to Julian's sprawling masterpiece. Her pale yellow uniform was starched and clean, but the collar was frayed, a quiet story of 1,000 wash cycles. She moved through the chaos with a fluid, practiced grace, a dancer performing a grueling, endless ballet. There were faint, violet shadows beneath her hazel eyes, but her focus was absolute. In her apron pocket, nestled beside her order pad, was a small, worn sketchbook and a charcoal pencil. As she refilled coffee cups and delivered plates, her mind was a split screen of duty and observation. Table 4 needs more ketchup. The old man in the corner has a tremor in his left hand. Parkinson's, maybe? The arguing couple. His jaw is tight, but his thumb is rubbing a worn spot on his jeans, a self-soothing gesture. He's more scared than angry. My shift ends in 53 minutes. Need to pick up Arthur's medication. The rent check will bounce if that freelance commission doesn't clear by Friday. Arthur, her grandfather, was the anchor and the storm of her life. A proud Korean War veteran, he was slowly being stolen by the fog of dementia. Clara was his sole caretaker, her small apartment, a fortress against his fading memories. She had been 2 semesters away from a fine arts degree at the Art Institute of Chicago when his condition had worsened, forcing her to trade her canvases for serving trays. Every spare dollar, every ounce of her energy was channeled into his care, into the quiet, desperate hope of keeping him tethered to the world, to himself, for just a little longer. Her sketchbook was her only escape. In it, she captured the faces of the city, the fleeting expressions of strangers, the architecture of a wrinkled hand, the silent stories told by a person's posture. She wasn't just looking. She was seeing. Julian watched her, a flicker of professional interest cutting through his ennui. It wasn't just her efficiency. It was the way she observed. She didn't offer the saccharine, manufactured friendliness of most servers. Her smile was a rare, genuine currency, offered to the construction worker when he told a bad joke, or to one of the elderly women who reminded her of her grandmother. He saw her approach the arguing couple. She didn't interrupt, but placed a glass of water on their table with a quiet deliberation that broke their toxic feedback loop. Her presence was a subtle shift in the room's emotional gravity. He was about to dismiss this observation as trivial when the bell above the door jangled, not with a cheerful chime, but with a discordant, violent clang. 2 men stormed in. They weren't physically imposing, but they vibrated with the ragged, desperate energy of men who had run out of choices. The taller one wore a grimy blue ski mask. The other, younger, had a grey hoodie cinched so tight only his pale, terrified eyes were visible. The man in the mask brandished a matte black handgun, his grip unsteady, the weapon seeming to lead his trembling hand. "Nobody fucking move!" His voice cracked, a desperate shriek that tore the diner's cozy fiction to shreds. "Cash register! Now!" The room froze solid. The symphony of clattering forks and low chatter died, replaced by a vacuum of pure terror. Someone gasped. The construction worker's hands shot up, his face ashen. The metallic tang of fear filled the air. The second man, the one in the hoodie, scrambled over the counter with a clumsy athleticism, shoving the owner, a portly, sweating man named Gus, against the gleaming chrome of the espresso machine. "All of it! All of it!" Clara had been returning to the kitchen, her hands full of dirty dishes. She was caught in the open, a dozen feet from the gunman. His wild, panicked eyes, visible through the holes in the mask, darted around the room before locking onto her. "You! On the floor! Get on the goddamn floor!" he screamed, the gun wavering dangerously in her direction. Julian Thorne's body went rigid. His mind, a finely tuned instrument for risk analysis, instantly processed the variables. 2 assailants, 1 firearm, likely a 9mm. Perpetrators are amateurs, high on adrenaline. Primary motive is cash. Tremors indicate nervousness, increasing the probability of an accidental discharge. He discreetly began to slide his hand into his jacket, where his phone had a direct, silent link to his elite private security team. But he stopped. His eyes were fixed on Clara. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not immediately drop to the floor. With a slow, deliberate movement that was almost hypnotic, she turned and placed the stack of plates on an empty table. The soft clatter of porcelain on formica was a gunshot in the deafening silence. Then she raised her hands, slowly, palms open, a universal sign of peace. "Okay," she said. Her voice was low, but it resonated with an unnatural calm. It was the same tone she used to soothe her grandfather during his moments of confusion. "It's okay. Everyone just do what he says. Let him get the money." Her eyes met the gunman's. It wasn't a challenge. It was a communication. She wasn't looking at a monster. Her artist's eye was deconstructing him. She saw the cheap, worn-out boots, one lace frayed. She saw the slight, involuntary twitch in his neck. She saw the terror in his posture, mirroring the terror in the eyes of the younger man behind the counter. She saw 2 scared boys in over their heads. One of the elderly women began to sob loudly, a high, keening sound that frayed the gunman's last nerve. His head snapped toward the sound, the gun following his gaze. "Shut her up! I swear to God, shut her up or I'll—" "Mom!" Clara said, her voice cutting cleanly through his panic. She never broke eye contact with the gunman. but her words were a lifeline to the terrified woman. "Mrs. Gable, it's Clara. Look at me. Take a deep breath. It's almost over. Just breathe with me now." It was an act of breathtaking audacity. She was managing the room. She was managing the hostage-taker. She was triaging the emotional chaos. Behind the counter, the younger man had stuffed a canvas bag with cash. "Let's go, man, let's go," he hissed, his voice a panicked whisper. The gunman began to back away toward the door, his weapon still sweeping across the room. His eyes met Clara's one last time. For an infinitesimal second, Julian saw something pass between them, a flicker of confusion, a sliver of shame, a moment of human connection in the midst of madness, before the man turned and vanished with his partner into the cacophony of the city. The diner imploded. Sobs became wails. Gus fumbled with his phone to call 911. The air crackled with the aftermath of adrenaline. And through it all, Clara moved. She went to Mrs. Gable first, kneeling by the booth, her voice a soft murmur. She brought her water. She checked on the arguing couple, now clinging to each other. She moved from table to table, a small island of tranquility in a sea of shock. Julian Thorne remained in his booth, motionless. He had witnessed the entire tableau not as a potential victim, but as a connoisseur of human behavior observing a master at work. He had seen titans of industry dissolve into blubbering children during a market downturn. He had watched seasoned politicians crumble under the slightest pressure. This young woman, who probably earned less in a month than he spent on wine in a week, had faced down a loaded gun with more tactical composure and emotional intelligence than any executive in his company. It wasn't fearlessness. That was reckless. It was control. She hadn't just survived the crisis. She had managed it. The belated scream of sirens announced the arrival of the police. Statements were taken, the scene processed. The chaos slowly congealed into the weary hum of procedure. Clara, her face now pale, the shadows under her eyes stark against her skin, finally resumed her duties as if on autopilot. She brought the check to Julian's table. Her hand, he noted, had a slight tremor now, the delayed shock finally claiming its due. I'm very sorry about all that, sir," she said, her voice raspy. "Your breakfast is on the house." Julian looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the frayed collar, the profound exhaustion, and the bedrock of solid steel beneath it all. He took the check. He didn't sign it. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his suit coat and withdrew a slim, platinum money clip. He peeled off 20 crisp, $100 bills. $2,000. Tucked beneath the top bill, he placed his personal business card, a severe rectangle of thick, black cardstock, with his name and a single phone number embossed in silver. He placed the stack on the table and rose to his feet. "That wasn't calm," he said, his voice a low, gravelly timbre. "That was analysis. That was control. Utterly remarkable." Before the astonished Clara could form a single word, he turned and walked out of the diner, leaving behind a sum of money that could solve her immediate crises, and a small black card that held the power to either utterly destroy her fragile world or rebuild it into an empire. The wail of the sirens eventually faded, replaced by the hushed, frantic whispers of the remaining patrons and the clatter of Gus sweeping up a shattered water glass. Clara's body moved with the familiar rhythm of her job, but her mind was a still photograph of the corner booth. $2,000. The stack of bills on the table felt like a hallucination, a cruel joke, and the card, stark and black, seemed to absorb the light around it. Julian Thorne, Thorne Industries. A wave of relief, so potent it made her knees weak, washed over her. $2,000. It wasn't a tip, it was a miracle. It was Arthur's next 3 months of the expensive new medication the VA wouldn't cover. It was the overdue rent. It was the security deposit on a better, ground-floor apartment, so her grandfather wouldn't have to navigate the treacherous stairs. It was a gasp of oxygen in a life spent underwater. Her co-worker, a perpetually anxious young woman named Sarah, stared at the money with wide eyes. Clara, who was that? Did he just... Is that real? I don't know, Clara stammered, her fingers trembling as she scooped up the cash and the card. She tucked it deep into her apron pocket, the crisp edges of the bills a secret, solid promise against her thigh. The rest of her shift passed in a surreal haze. She gave her statement to a detective, her voice even and clear as she recounted the events. She remembered details others had missed, the faded ship tattoo on the younger robber's wrist, the way the gunman favored his right leg, a slight, almost imperceptible limp. She reported it all with the dispassionate clarity of an artist documenting a subject, a holdover from the anatomy classes she'd once loved. When she finally stepped out into the evening air, the city felt different. The weight of it, usually a crushing burden, felt manageable. Back in her cramped apartment, the air thick with the scent of lavender oil she used to calm Arthur, the day's events finally caught up with her. Arthur was sitting in his favorite armchair, humming a tune from the 1950s, a placid smile on his face. He was in one of his good moments. "How was work, Sweet Pea?" he asked, his eyes clear. Looking at his beloved face, the terror she had so expertly compartmentalized in the diner rose in her throat, hot and acidic. Her hands shook as she laid the money out on the small kitchen table, counting it again and again. It was real, but so was the card. Julian Thorne. The name echoed with the distant thunder of wealth and power. She pulled out her old sluggish laptop and typed his name into the search engine. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Images of a severe, unsmiling man shaking hands with world leaders, standing before gleaming glass towers that clawed at the sky. Articles in Fortune and the Wall Street Journal. The strategist of steel, one headline dubbed him. The man who sees around corners, read another. He was a legend, a corporate predator, a recluse, known for his brutal foresight and his complete intolerance for failure. He was the man from the diner. Why? Why would a man like that give a waitress $2,000? And the card, it couldn't be charity. Men like Julian Thorne didn't deal in charity. They dealt in assets and leverage. Every action was a calculated move on a global chessboard. The money felt like an investment. The card felt like a summons. For 4 days, the black card sat on her counter like a miniature monolith. She paid the rent. She bought the medication. She put a deposit down on a new apartment in a quiet building with an elevator and a small garden. The money was a balm, but the card was a splinter in her mind. What could he possibly want? Was it some bizarre whim of a bored billionaire? Was he expecting something else? Her mind, already exhausted from the constant worry over Arthur, churned with suspicion. On the 3rd day, Arthur picked up the card. "This feels important," he said, his lucidity a fleeting gift. A man who uses card stock this heavy isn't asking. He's telling. Clara looked at her grandfather, at the wisdom that still shone through the cracks in his memory. He was right. This wasn't an invitation. It was an expectation. What did she have to lose? Her pride. Pride didn't pay for neurological specialists. Her dead-end job? The thought was almost laughable. She was an artist, forced to be a waitress, a caregiver on the brink of financial ruin. Maybe it was time to see what the man who saw around corners had seen in her. On the 5th day, with a breath that felt stolen from her own lungs, she dialed the number. She braced herself for an executive assistant, a sterile, automated menu, a corporate wall. A man's voice answered on the 2nd ring. Thorne. It was him. The same deep, gravelly voice. No greeting. Just his name, stated like a fact. Clara's mouth went dry. Hello, Mr. Thorne. This is Clara Evans, from the Gilded Spoon diner the other day. There was a beat of silence. She could almost feel him calculating, assessing. I know who you are, Ms. Evans. I was beginning to question my assessment of your character. My character? I judged you to be decisive, he said, his tone flat. 5 days is not decisive. It's apprehensive. There's a difference. A spark of defiance cut through her anxiety. 5 days is prudent, Mr. Thorne. I had to secure my grandfather's immediate care before entertaining a cryptic summons from a complete stranger. Another pause. This one longer. When he spoke again, she could have sworn she heard the ghost of a smile in his voice. Prudent. Acceptable. Thorne Industries headquarters, 150 West Madison, 95th floor, tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp. The line went dead. There was no, if you're interested. No explanation. It was a command. The next morning, Clara stood before a black tower that seemed to vanish into the low-hanging clouds. She wore her one good outfit, a simple charcoal grey dress she'd bought at a consignment shop years ago. It felt like armor made of paper as she walked through the cavernous lobby of granite and steel, a world away from the sticky floors of the Gilded Spoon. The 95th floor was a silent, rarefied world. The air smelled of money, a sterile blend of leather and ambition. A receptionist who looked more like a model directed her toward a set of imposing oak doors. Julian Thorne's office was an exercise in minimalist power. An entire wall was a single pane of glass, offering a panoramic, god-like view of Chicago. He stood before it, his back to her, a silhouette against the sprawling city. Ms. Evans, he said, without turning. You're 3 minutes early. I appreciate that. He turned, his eyes as grey and cold as the winter lake below. Sit. She perched on the edge of a leather chair that likely cost more than her tuition. I do not value small talk, Ms. Evans, so let's be direct, he began, taking his seat behind a desk that was a vast, empty expanse of polished ebony. The $2,000 was an honorarium for the demonstration. The demonstration? Clara asked, her voice tight. Watching you manage that chaos was the most compelling strategic analysis I have witnessed in a decade, he said. You didn't just stay calm. You observed. You identified the primary threat. Not the gun, but the panic. You de-escalated the peripheral threats, the sobbing woman. You assessed the perpetrator's emotional state. You controlled the environment. That is a skill set. It is a rare and profoundly valuable one. He leaned forward, his gaze pinning her to the chair. I am surrounded by people who have been trained to analyze data, spreadsheets, market trends, financial reports. They can tell me the what. They can rarely tell me the why. They have lost the ability to read the most complex and volatile system of all, human beings. You, on the other hand, seem to have a natural aptitude for it. Clara thought of her sketchbook, of the hours spent studying the subtle tells of human emotion. I like to watch people, she said simply. I'm creating a new position, Thorne continued, ignoring her comment. Special advisor to the chairman. You will report directly to me. Your portfolio will be people. Clara felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Mr. Thorne, I'm a waitress. I have an incomplete fine arts degree. I'm not qualified for... Your resume is that diner, he cut in, his voice sharp. "Your degree is the cool-headed analysis you performed while a gun was pointed at your face. I can hire 100 MBAs from Harvard who would have curled into a ball and wept. They are useless to me. I want you to be my eyes. When we are in a tense negotiation, you will watch the other side. You will tell me who is bluffing, who is weak, who is lying. When we are considering acquiring a company, you will assess its leadership, its morale, its human infrastructure. You will not look at their balance sheets. You will look into their eyes." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was an offer letter. The salary printed on it made her vision blur. It was a number she couldn't even process, followed by a benefits package that included the kind of comprehensive health care for dependents she had only dreamed of for Arthur. I don't understand. Your job is to see what others miss," he said. "Your first assignment is to see why this is a logical business decision. There is, however, a condition." His tone became glacial. "Absolute, unequivocal loyalty, and absolute discretion. You will be my secret weapon. No one in this company will understand why you are here. They will resent you. They will test you. They will try to break you. My senior VP of acquisitions in particular will see you as a personal affront to his existence. If you fail, if you break, you are gone. There are no second chances in my world." He stood. The audience concluded. "I require your answer by noon." Clara also stood, the offer letter a lead weight in her hand. This was a world of sharks, and she was a minnow. But she had learned long ago that even sharks have blind spots. She looked from the life-altering paper in her hand to the sprawling city behind him, a city that had always felt like an adversary. For the first time, it looked like a canvas. "You don't need to wait until noon, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice finding that same quiet, steady place it had in the diner. "I accept." A flicker of something, not quite a smile, but a deep satisfaction, crossed Julian Thorne's face. "Good," he said. "Your education begins Monday." Clara's first day at Thorne Industries was an exercise in sensory overload. The 95th floor was a cathedral of hushed ambition, the silence punctuated only by the soft clicks of keyboards and the whisper of expensive shoes on polished marble. Her office was a glass-walled enclosure adjacent to Julian's, a placement that was both a privilege and a prison. It immediately marked her as something different, an anomaly in this highly structured ecosystem. The eyes were on her instantly, curious, dismissive, and in some cases, openly hostile. The whispers were a constant, low-frequency hum. "That's her, the waitress. I heard Thorne hired her after she served him a good cup of coffee. My nephew has a doctorate in behavioral economics from the University of Chicago, and he couldn't get past the first interview." Her chief antagonist revealed himself on the second day. His name was Marcus Vance, Senior Vice President of Mergers and Acquisitions. He was the epitome of corporate polish. Tall, with a mane of perfectly coiffed dark hair, a suit that shimmered with an expensive sheen, and a smile that was a triumph of cosmetic dentistry over genuine warmth. He was Julian's golden boy, an Ivy League prodigy who saw Clara's presence as a grotesque cosmic error. "Clara, isn't it?" he said, leaning casually against her doorframe, his posture a declaration of ownership over the space. "Marcus Vance just wanted to officially welcome you aboard." The words were welcoming. The tone was a thinly veiled sneer. "Thank you, Marcus," Clara replied, her voice neutral. She remained seated, forcing him to literally talk down to her, a small piece of psychological territory she refused to cede. "We're all just fascinated by your unique career trajectory," he continued, his eyes sweeping over her simple, unadorned office. "Julian certainly likes to keep us on our toes. from food service to finance. Quite the leap. I was a waitress, Clara corrected him, meeting his gaze without flinching. And I'm a quick study. Marcus let out a short, dry chuckle. Well, if you ever need someone to explain the difference between a poison pill and a golden parachute, don't hesitate to ask. We wouldn't want you getting your signals crossed. He sauntered away, leaving a wake of smug superiority. Clara ignored the politics. For the first 2 weeks, she did exactly as Julian instructed. She observed. She sat in the back of high-level meetings, a silent ghost with her sketchbook, saying nothing. While the executives argued over projections and EBITDA, she sketched their faces, noting the executive who chewed his thumbnail when discussing risk, the lawyer whose blink rate increased when a certain clause was mentioned, the way Marcus Vance's smile tightened at the corners whenever Julian praised a rival's idea. She was mapping the hidden currents of power and fear that flowed beneath the surface of the corporate jargon. Her first real test came in the 3rd week. Julian summoned her to his office. "The Oakhaven Project," he said, gesturing to a set of blueprints on his conference table. Thorn Industries was planning a state-of-the-art biotech campus, but the project was stalled. An old, community-run theatre, the Lyric, sat on a key parcel of land. It was a beloved local landmark, run by a fiercely protective 80-year-old woman named Evelyn Reed, who had been the theatre's director for 50 years. "Marcus has been handling the negotiations," Julian said, his voice laced with disapproval. "He has tripled our initial buyout offer. He has offered to build them a new, modern facility. His next step is to use eminent domain and legal force. He sees Mrs. Reed as an obstacle to be crushed. He doesn't understand the problem. I want you to handle it. Go there. Talk to her. Solve it. You have 1 week." It was a public rebuke of his top lieutenant. As Clara left Julian's office, she saw Marcus through his glass wall, his face a thunderous mask of fury as he slammed down his phone. Clara didn't consult the legal team or review the financial offers. Her first stop was the city's historical archives. She spent a day poring over dusty records, old newspapers and photographs of the Lyric. Then she went to a small Italian bakery and bought a box of cannoli. She found Evelyn Reed in the theatre's dusty lobby. She was a tiny woman with a will of iron and eyes that had seen a lifetime of opening nights and final curtains. "If you're another one of Mr. Thorne's vultures, you can save your breath," Evelyn said, not bothering to look up from the program she was editing. "My name is Clara Evans," Clara said softly. "I'm not here to make you an offer. I'm here to ask you a question. I brought cannoli from Moretti's. I read an article from 1978 that said you always have them on opening night, for good luck." Evelyn's head snapped up, her stern expression softening with surprise. She looked at Clara, then at the pastry box. A long moment passed. "Well," she sighed, a reluctant smile touching her lips, "it would be a crime to let good cannoli go stale. Come in, dear." Inside the magnificent, decaying theatre, Clara didn't speak of demolition or dollars. She asked about the ghost light on the stage. She asked about the faded signatures of actors on the dressing room walls. She listened for 2 hours as Evelyn spoke of the theatre, not as a building, but as a living entity, a repository of a century of the community's laughter and tears. "That slick young man, Mr. Vance, he doesn't get it," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with passion. "He thinks he can buy our memories. He offered to name a conference room in his new glass box after us. A conference room? This place is sacred." "He's trying to buy the vessel," Clara said quietly. "He doesn't understand that what you're trying to protect is the soul." "Exactly." Clara leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Evelyn, Thorn Industries is a force of nature. It won't be stopped. That is the unfortunate reality. But what if we don't have to choose between the future and the past? What if we could integrate them? From her bag, Clara pulled not a contract, but a charcoal sketch she had made the night before. It was a rendering of a stunning new biotech campus. But at its heart, nestled in a green plaza, was the fully restored, magnificent facade of the Lyric Theatre. "The proposal I'm suggesting to Mr. Thorne is this," Clara said, her voice gaining strength. "We don't tear it down. We build around it. The Lyric is restored to its former glory, funded entirely by Thorne. It becomes the cultural and architectural heart of the new campus, a living piece of history surrounded by the future. But there's more." She pulled out a second document from the archives. It was a copy of the theatre's original charter from 1923. The primary benefactor, the man who provided the seed money to build this theatre 100 years ago, was a man named Alistair Thorne, Julian Thorne's grandfather. Evelyn Reed stared at her, speechless. Tears welled in her eyes. Marcus Vance had offered her money. Clara Evans had offered her a legacy. When Clara presented the solution to Julian, with Marcus Vance present, the atmosphere in the room was electric. The plan was not only an elegant solution to the PR nightmare, but was also a stroke of architectural and marketing genius. Julian simply nodded slowly, a deep, profound respect dawning in his eyes. Marcus's face was a pale, rigid mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. He had tried to use a battering ram and failed. The waitress had used a key he didn't even know existed. The victory solidified Clara's position, but also painted a giant target on her back. Marcus began a campaign of insidious warfare. Key data for her projects would be mysteriously corrupted. Meetings would be scheduled on her behalf without her knowledge. He would subtly misquote her in briefings to Julian, twisting her words to make her sound naive or incompetent. But Clara, used to juggling a dozen chaotic tables at once, was preternaturally organized. She kept meticulous notes. She sent summary emails after every conversation. She built her own network of allies among the administrative staff, the people Marcus was too arrogant to notice, who saw her quiet competence and appreciated her respect. Her new life was a dream. She and Arthur were settled in their new apartment. The best doctors were managing his condition. For the first time, she could breathe. She even set up a small art studio in the spare bedroom. But the pressure of the 95th floor was relentless. She knew she was one mistake away from losing it all. The simmering conflict with Marcus was destined to boil over. The catalyst was a massive, multi-billion-dollar acquisition of a German tech firm, a deal Marcus had been working on for a year. It was to be the crowning achievement of his career. As was now standard procedure, Julian tasked Clara with performing a human analytics review of the target company's executive team. She flew to Berlin and spent a week observing. On the surface, everything looked perfect. The CEO, Klaus Richter, was charismatic and brilliant. But Clara saw things the financial auditors missed. She saw the way his senior engineers flinched when he entered a room. She saw the forced, brittle smiles of his direct reports. In a quiet conversation with a junior programmer, a conversation she initiated after noticing his exhausted posture and the way he obsessively cleaned his glasses, she learned the truth. Richter was a tyrant, a brilliant but abusive leader who took credit for his team's work and ruled by fear. The company's top talent was hemorrhaging, with key people already interviewing with competitors, waiting only for the acquisition to finalize so their stock options would vest. Thorne Industries wasn't acquiring a thriving tech giant. They were buying a hollowed-out shell with a toxic leader. She brought her findings directly to Julian. Her report was a direct contradiction of Marcus's glowing assessment. "This is absurd," Marcus raged in Julian's office. She spoke to a disgruntled coder. My analysis is based on a year of hard data, financials, and market position. Are you going to kill the biggest deal in this company's history based on the vibe of a former waitress? Julian looked from Marcus's furious, pleading face to Clara's calm, resolute one. The human element is the hard data, Marcus, Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. It's the one you've consistently proven incapable of reading. The deal is on hold. Clara, I want you to find me a way to salvage this. I want the technology, not the tyrant. It was the ultimate humiliation for Marcus. He had been sidelined on his own deal. His obsession with destroying Clara curdled into a venomous, desperate need for revenge. He knew he couldn't beat her on merit, so he would burn her to the ground. He hired a private investigator, a man with a reputation for unearthing secrets that could topple corporations. The instruction was simple. Find me a piece of filth on Clara Evans. I don't care what it is. I want to ruin her. The investigator dug, and what he found was a thread, a tiny, almost invisible thread that led all the way back to that fateful Tuesday at the Gilded Spoon. A thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything. The air on the 95th floor grew thick with the unspoken war between Marcus and Clara. He was a creature of open aggression, his snide remarks and power plays becoming more blatant. Clara, in contrast, moved with a quiet, deliberate focus, her mind consumed with the German acquisition. Julian's directive, salvage it, was the most complex challenge she had ever faced. She dove into the problem, not as a corporate raider, but as a diagnostician. The company's technology was brilliant, but its soul was sick. The cure wasn't just removing the CEO, Klaus Richter. It was about saving the team he had terrorized. Working through back channels, she began discreetly identifying the top engineers who were poised to leave. She didn't offer them money. She offered them a future. She presented a radical plan to Julian. Instead of a traditional acquisition, they would fund a new, independent subsidiary. They would poach the top dozen engineers from the German firm, including the quiet junior programmer who had first spoken to her, and set them up in their own lab in Chicago, free from Richter's toxic influence. They would acquire the talent and the intellectual property, letting the hollow corporate shell of the old company wither. It was a surgical strike, not a bludgeoning. Julian was captivated by the sheer audacity of it. "You're not buying a company," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're staging a rescue mission." While Clara was orchestrating this corporate coup, Marcus was receiving a report from his private investigator. The news was both disappointing and tantalizing. "Her life is boringly clean," the investigator, a man named Rex, reported over the phone. "No debt, no scandals, no criminal record. Cares for her old granddad. Pays her taxes. But," I went back to the source, "the diner robbery." "What about it?" Marcus snapped, impatient. "The police arrested one of the perps a few months back, a kid named Leo. His partner is still in the wind. This kid, Leo, he rolled on his partner to get a lighter sentence. Gave them a name. Shane. No last name, just Shane. Described him as an older guy, desperate, with a distinctive tattoo on his neck. A ship's anchor tangled in thorns." Marcus felt a prickle of irritation. How does any of this help me? A tattoo on a random thug? "Patience," Rex purred. "The interesting part isn't the robber. It's the waitress. I pulled the diner's employee records. Clara Evans listed one emergency contact. Her grandfather, Arthur Evans. So I ran a background check on Grandpa. Decorated war hero, worked as a foreman at the old South Chicago steel yards for 30 years after the war. Widower. Clean record. But he had a son. Clara's father, Michael Evans. A knot tightened in Marcus's stomach. Michael was the black sheep, Rex continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. A string of petty crimes, gambling debts, a real piece of work. He abandoned Clara and her mother when she was a kid. He drifted in and out of her life, always asking for money. He died of a drug overdose 8 years ago. But before he did, he had a lot of friends in low places. And according to a social services report from when Clara was a teenager, her father's best friend, his running buddy, a man who practically lived at their house for a while, was a guy named Shane Corrigan. The line went silent as the implication sunk in. "I pulled Corrigan's mug shot," Rex said, delivering the final blow. "Guess what's tattooed on the side of his neck?" Marcus's mind reeled. Shane Corrigan, the second robber. The man who had held a gun on Clara Evans was an old family associate. A man she would have known. It was a connection. A dirty, ugly connection. It didn't prove anything. But in the world of corporate warfare, proof was unnecessary. All he needed was the poison of insinuation. He could paint a picture, the down-on-her-luck waitress, desperate to change her life, orchestrates a heroic moment with an old family friend to catch the eye of a reclusive billionaire she knows frequents the diner. It was perfect. It was vile. It was exactly what he needed. He decided to wait for the most opportune moment, the moment of Clara's greatest triumph, to deploy his weapon. That moment came a week later. Clara's plan to create a new subsidiary for the German engineers had been executed flawlessly. The new team was in Chicago, thrilled and motivated. Thorn Industries had acquired the prize assets for a fraction of the original cost, and Klaus Richter's company was left in a free fall. Julian called a special meeting of the entire executive board to announce the success. It was to be Clara's coronation. The boardroom was packed. Julian stood at the head of the long mahogany table, beaming with a pride Marcus had never seen him display. "What Ms. Evans has accomplished," Julian announced, his voice booming with authority, "is a paradigm shift in how we approach acquisitions. She has demonstrated that the most valuable asset in any company is not its infrastructure or its market share, but its people. This will be the new Thorn model." He turned to Clara, who sat at his right hand. "Clara, congratulations." As the room erupted in polite, if somewhat stunned applause, Marcus stood up. "This is indeed a momentous occasion," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "And it's all the more remarkable given Miss Evans's own, unconventional path to this table. A path, I have discovered, that may not be the fairy tale of coincidence we've all been led to believe." A hush fell over the room. Julian's smile vanished, replaced by a thunderous scowl. "What is the meaning of this, Marcus?" "The meaning, Julian," Marcus said, savoring the moment, "is that our brilliant new strategist has a history of being in the right place at the right time. Specifically, the Gilded Spoon Diner. I took the liberty of doing some digging into that convenient robbery. It turns out the gunman, a career criminal named Shane Corrigan, was not a stranger to our Ms. Evans." He let the words hang in the air. Clara's face went white. She knew Shane Corrigan. He was a ghost from the darkest chapter of her childhood, a man she hadn't seen in 15 years, a man she associated with her father's ruin. "In fact," Marcus continued, pacing behind his chair like a prosecutor, "Corrigan was a close associate of Clara's own father, a man who was practically part of their family. Now, what are the odds that, of all the diners in all of Chicago, this man would happen to stage a robbery at the exact moment a famous billionaire was present, and that his old family friend would perform so heroically?" He looked directly at the board members. I'm not suggesting a conspiracy. I'm merely presenting facts and asking questions. It paints a rather troubling picture of opportunism, doesn't it? The accusation was a venomous cloud, filling the room, poisoning everything. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting from Marcus's triumphant smirk to Clara's ashen face. She was trapped, her past weaponized against her, her success recast as a sordid deception. The silence was absolute, a crushing weight. Julian Thorne turned his cold grey eyes on her, his expression unreadable, and for the first time since she'd met him, Clara felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. Her entire future hung suspended on his next words. The boardroom air was thick enough to choke on. Every eye was on Clara, their expressions a mixture of shock, suspicion, and a sort of lurid curiosity. Marcus Vance stood tall, his face flushed with the thrill of a successful kill shot. He had laid the perfect trap, a web of insinuation from which there was no escape. He hadn't accused her of a crime. He had accused her of a flaw in character, a sin far more damning in Julian Thorne's world. Clara's mind was a maelstrom. Shane Corrigan. The name was a key to a locked room in her memory, filled with the ghosts of her father's failures, the smell of stale beer, and the sound of angry, whispered arguments. She remembered him as a lanky, unsettling presence from her childhood, a man with hollow eyes who had disappeared from her life along with her father. The thought that he was the man behind the mask, the man whose trembling hand had held a gun on her, was a sickening revelation. But then, through the fog of shock, the artist's eye took over. The analyst, the part of her that Julian had hired. She forced the panic down and began to deconstruct the scene in front of her, just as she had in the diner. Marcus's triumphant posture, the board members' shifting gazes, Julian's unnerving stillness. Julian Thorne finally moved. He turned his chair slightly, not to look at Marcus, but to face Clara directly. His face was a granite mask, his voice low and dangerously calm. "Miss Evans," he said, the words dropping like stones into the silence. "Did you know this man, Shane Corrigan?" This was the moment. Her entire future balanced on the point of this needle. A lie would be instantly sniffed out. The truth was a minefield. She took a slow, steadying breath. "Yes, Mr. Thorne, I did," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. The board members gasped collectively. Marcus's smile widened. "He was a friend of my late father's," Clara continued, meeting Julian's gaze. "I haven't seen or spoken to him in over 15 years. I did not recognize him during the robbery." "A convenient lapse in memory," Marcus scoffed. Clara turned her attention to Marcus, her eyes suddenly blazing with a cold fire he had never seen before. "It wasn't a lapse, Marcus. It was an observation. The man in the diner was terrified, desperate, and underweight. The Shane Corrigan I remember from my childhood was arrogant and wiry. People change. But you know what doesn't?" She reached into the portfolio in front of her and pulled out her sketchbook. She flipped it open to a page dated the day of the robbery. The page was filled with quick, frantic charcoal studies of the two robbers. There were sketches of the younger one's terrified eyes, the frayed lace on the gunman's boot, and on the bottom of the page a detailed drawing of a hand, the gunman's hand, holding the pistol. "I didn't recognize his face," Clara said, her voice ringing with authority. "But I documented his fear. And I documented this." She pointed to the drawing, his left thumb. There was a small, crescent-shaped scar on the nail bed, and he was wearing a cheap silver ring on his index finger with a black, cracked stone. Details I gave to the police in my official statement. She then looked directly at Julian. "Mr. Thorne, You hired me to see things others miss, while Marcus was busy hiring a private detective to dig through the wreckage of my childhood. I was doing the job you gave me. I was solving the German acquisition, but I also followed up on the robbery. I contacted the detective on the case last month to see if my descriptions had been of any use. She pulled a folded email from her portfolio. The first robber, Leo, was apprehended. The second man, Shane Corrigan, is still at large. But Leo confirmed to the police that Corrigan had recently lost a significant amount of weight due to his drug habit. He also confirmed that Corrigan has a crescent-shaped scar on his left thumb from an old knife fight, and that he never takes off a cheap silver ring his mother gave him. She placed the sketchbook and the email on the table. These are the facts, Marcus, not your pathetic, poisonous insinuations. The fact is, I was the victim of a violent crime committed by a man I would later learn was a ghost from my past. The fact is, my detailed observation, the very skill for which Mr. Thorne hired me, was instrumental in helping the police identify him. The only troubling picture in this room is that of a desperate executive so terrified of being outshone that he would exploit a victim's trauma and dredge up her painful family history in a pathetic attempt to save his own career. Every word was a hammer blow. The narrative had been utterly and completely shattered and rebuilt in the space of 60 seconds. Marcus Vance was left exposed, his scheme revealed not as a clever political move, but as a cruel, pathetic attack. He stood, speechless, his face a mottled canvas of scarlet and white. Julian Thorne slowly rose to his full height, his shadow falling over the table. He looked at Marcus, and for the first time, Clara saw not just cold anger in his eyes, but a profound, weary disgust. "Marcus," Julian said, his voice a low growl of finality, "you have mistaken ambition for vision for a very long time. You have mistaken ruthlessness for strength. But this is a failure of character so complete, so irredeemable that it has no place in my company." He gestured to the door. "Pack your personal effects. Security will escort you from the building. You are finished here." After Marcus had stumbled from the room in a state of shock, Julian turned to the stunned board. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," he said, his voice like cracking ice. "Talent is one thing. Character is everything. This meeting is adjourned." As the executives filed out, avoiding Clara's eyes, a quiet settled over the vast room. It was just her and Julian. He walked to the great window, looking down at the city below. "He could have cost you everything," Clara said softly, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving her shaking. Julian turned from the window. The cold mask was gone, replaced by something softer, something she had never seen before, respect, unvarnished and absolute. "No," he said. "He could not, because his entire accusation was based on the premise that I am a fool, that my judgment is so poor I can be tricked by a piece of cheap theatre." He walked over to her and gently closed her sketchbook. "I didn't hire you because you were a hero, Clara. I hired you because you were an analyst. Today you proved you are also a warrior. The position of Executive Vice President of a new division, Strategic Initiatives, is now open. The job is yours." The story of Marcus Vance's spectacular fall and Clara Evans's meteoric rise became a legend within the walls of Thorne Industries. But the true viral moment, the one that caught the world's attention, came months later. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A local Chicago blog published a feature on the miraculous revival of the Lyric Theatre, profiling the brilliant woman from Thorne Industries who had saved it. The journalist, intrigued by Clara's background, dug deeper. She spoke to Gus at the Gilded Spoon, who told her the incredible story of the robbery, the impossibly calm waitress, and the mysterious billionaire who left a life-changing tip. The journalist connected the dots. The resulting article, published in a major online news magazine under the headline, "The Waitress, the Billionaire, and the Deal of a Century," was an internet sensation. It was a modern fairy tale, but with a crucial twist. Clara, now poised and confident, handled the media attention with the same grace she had shown under fire. In her one and only televised interview, she masterfully controlled the narrative. "Everyone wants to talk about the robbery," she said, her calm gaze directed at the camera. "But the robbery was just a catalyst. This story isn't about a lucky break. It's about the skills we forge in adversity. For years, my primary job was being a caregiver to my grandfather, who suffers from dementia. That taught me more about de-escalation, empathy, and reading non-verbal cues than any business school ever could. Mr. Thorne didn't rescue a waitress. He invested in a specialist whose training ground was life itself. Talent isn't confined to the Ivy League. It's in diners, hospitals, and libraries. You just have to be willing to look." The story became an inspiration. Clara Evans became a symbol of untapped potential. Julian Thorne, the cold-hearted strategist, was lauded as a visionary who understood the true meaning of human capital. From her new office on the 95th floor, Clara launched her first major initiative as EVP, the Thorne Foundation's Second Act Scholarship, a massive fund for people over 40 who had to abandon their education for family or financial reasons and now sought to re-enter the workforce in new fields. Her first grant was awarded to a 52-year-old former truck driver who wanted to become a pediatric nurse. Her life was transformed. Arthur was stable, his care managed by the best medical team in the state. He spent his lucid days in the small garden of their building, sketching alongside his granddaughter. One evening, Julian Thorne found Clara in her office, staring at a preliminary sketch for a new community arts center she was planning to fund. "You've changed this company," he said, his tone one of quiet wonder. "It has a conscience." "You taught me to find the weakness in a system," Clara replied, a small smile on her face. "A system that discards people with valuable life experience is a weak system. I'm just shoring up the foundations." Julian looked out the window at the endless constellation of city lights. For decades, he had seen those lights as data points on a balance sheet. Now, for the first time, he saw them as individual stories, a vast, interconnected network of human potential. He had spent his life building an empire of steel and glass. But by taking a chance on the waitress from the corner booth, he had finally started building a legacy.